morning.
MC. It is such a great honor and a blessing, not just for myself, but for my family, for us to be here to worship together with you and your families. And we thank Reverend David for his guidance and his nurture in this journey that I have started to as an intern here at Covina. So today is Christ the King Sunday, which some may refer to as the last Sunday after Pentecost, or the last Sunday of the Christian liturgical year. Today is also the last worship Sunday as we approach the waiting and watching season of the Advent. Christ the King Sunday is the newest day that's added to the liturgical year across the Western Church. It was first added in 1925 by the Roman Catholic Church in response to increasing secularization movements worldwide. Pope Pius XI made the declaration the basis of the holy day to be observed throughout the entire Roman Catholic Church. Christ the King of the universe, after the Second Vatican, Rome moved the observance of this day from October to the final Sunday of the Christian year. And many Protestants, including United Methodists, who adopted the Revised Common Lectionary and its calendar, have followed suit. As we are reminded of what today is, this chapter, of our gospel today, shall I read which today is from the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verses 33 to 37. John chapter 18, verses 33 to 37. And it is recorded as so. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Amen.
Amen.
Continuing with this chapter of our gospel text for today, focuses on the portrayal and the arrest of Jesus. The gospel that we just heard speaks of a conversation between Pilate, a governor for the Roman Empire, and Jesus. Already the people are quick to hand over Jesus because they do not believe in him. They do not seek him. They do not follow him, yet they are threatened by him. Although Jesus was finally condemned to death and executed by the Romans, in John's gospel, the accusers are always called the Jews, who are mortal enemies. But with careful reading, the gospel reveals that the Jews, not of religion or ethnic grouping, but that referring to those who were in the temple religious authorities. So if we back up a couple verses before our readings for today, in John 18:31, Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." The intention to have Jesus killed was that the Jews wanted Pilate to pass the death sentence on Jesus because they have already determined him guilty. John does not describe all the details of the trial, but a charge has been brought against Jesus. Pilate now questions Jesus about the accusation, whether he poses a threat to Rome or not. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus wanted to know whether Pilate was asking the question for the Jews or for himself. The Jews were looking for a political king, and Jesus was not, at that moment, their king. In fact, the Jews were complaining that Jesus was a criminal. Pilate dismissed any prior conversation with the Jews. He simply wanted to know, what have you done? Then Jesus explains the nature of his kingdom. He has no political motives. His kingdom is a spiritual one which is not expanded or defined or defended by military force. We talk so much about statuses with titles and names, things with titles such as kings and leaders, and it comes with expectations. Yet Jesus argues that his kingdom is founded on truth. This is indifference to the earthly kingdoms which are founded on power. Aspects of earthly kings come with power, wealth, and force. This takes me back to a certain time in my childhood years where I would hear my great uncles and my great aunts and my grandmother talk stories of how the first king of our island countries in Tonga became royalty. Tauwha'ahau King George I was Tonga's first king. Tonga is the only remaining Polynesian kingdom, a constitutional monarchy. Recently, Tonga went through a democratic reform. The king gave up certain powers to the people, and the prime minister, leader of the government, is now elected by the people through the parliament and not appointed by the king. But it wasn't always like this. It is said that no ruler in the Pacific has done more for his people and his country than Tauwha'ahau King George I. Historians called him the maker of modern Tonga. Tongans were ruled by 3 different dynasties. Each dynasty had its own chiefs, and each chief was the head of a socio-political unit. Tauwha'ahau King George changed the traditional socio-political system by uniting Tonga into one kingdom under the rule of a constitution. He kept Tonga unique in its position and the only island country in the Pacific that has never been colonized. He was also responsible for the successful transition of Tonga society from being uncivilized to a modern one through adopting Western ideas and accepting Christianity. Some of the chiefs and the dynasties of the other families were not pleased with this change that they saw in Tauwha'ahau King George and felt threatened. Before Christianity arrived in Tonga in 1822 by British missionaries, acceptance of Christ got you killed, hung, shamed, and even brought war. The traditional religion was bound up with politics of Tonga and occupied a central place in Tonga worldview. Tauwha'ahau King George was a heathen, and so were the people. Each chief and his people had their own gods, and the chiefs were believed to have mana, a supernatural gift by the gods according to their own goodwill. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the cartoon movie Moana, but it's something similar to that. Failure to perform these religious duties and to honor the gods would cause war, famine, epidemics, diseases, and death. Offerings were made on important occasions, and the gods were consulted, particularly in the case of war, or before going on a long voyage. Tauwha'ahau King George had 2 gods who lived in the sea. Throughout King George's reign in Tonga, he fought and went to war with the other dynasty rulers. There were plans to have him persecuted, which failed. It was a very dark time. His intent was to bring all three major islands, Tongatapu, Hapai, and Vava'u, under one system and to convert most or all of the people to become Christians. Through the influence and the help of the missionaries, along with the newfound faith, King George was determined and succeeded. He successfully united the three main islands under one system in 1845 and converted over 2,000 people to the Christian faith. It was in 1838 that the King of Tonga, George de Beau I, declared, "It is of the Lord of the heaven and earth that I have been appointed to speak to you. He is King of kings and the Lord of lords. He is righteous in all works. We are all the works of his hands and the sheep of his pasture, and his will towards us is that we should be happy and in peace. Therefore it is that he made known to all the people, to all the chiefs, governors, as well as different strangers and foreigners that came into Tonga. King George then dedicated the kingdom of Tonga, people, land, animal, plants, to God by lifting up a handful of soil to the skies and praying to God. Since then, Tonga has been a place where people seek to be dedicated to God. It is not a perfect nation, but they strive to become better followers of Jesus. In fact, the national motto is translated as God and Tonga are my inheritance. Indeed, Jesus is a king with a divine authority. The gospel story of Jesus Christ is not the making of a king. Jesus did not come into the world to be a king, but rather to bring in God's kingdom. Jesus is very attentive in his ministry to express that it is God's kingdom that is being brought in. Jesus Christ is the foundation upon which everything rests. Jesus came to restore us to God, to undo the sin that Adam and Eve brought into the world, which we inherited. Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world, hung on a cross, died in our place, rose from the dead, and is coming again to restore us, body and soul, to God. That is truth. You cannot test it, and you cannot measure it, but you are baptized into it. It is amazing how Jesus says in verse 37, "Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." The word belongs stands apart from saying everyone who believes. In other words, Pilate did not belong to the truth, so he could not see that Jesus was the Son of God. It is also the truth that because of Jesus Christ, you and I are forgiven. Truth is that the Son of God is righteous, and we are righteous in God's sight. You are perfect in his eyes, and you are his dearly child. Christ the King Sunday is about much more than literal kings. It's about who or what ultimately rules over our lives. So I ask you to take a moment and think about, what does it mean to you to think of Jesus as Christ, as King of our lives? Do you think of glamour and fame? Do you think of endless lavishing meals? Or do you think of power? Jesus Christ in our gospel reading stands before you, about to be crucified for you, because he is the way and the truth and the life. Do you want one last look at King Jesus? Well, look up, not to the ceiling, but to the cross. Hear him, seek him, follow him, and believe in him. If the king is dead, what point is there in wishing him long life? But the point is that the kingdom will endure. Finally, when he is buried, his body is encased, and on the third day when he comes out, all creation, and we with it, cries, "Long live the King." Amen.
Amen.